Let us continue. It is a love for Jesus suffering, not a morbid love, but a longing and an ardent desire to become more and more like Jesus. This experience of love will show you the shattered points of your life, the broken dreams and longings now connected with meaning. Previously, you cannot understand why you have to undergo this great suffering. Suddenly, all those injustices and sufferings that you went through have become alive with meaning. And all of these experiences are beautifully woven together in a tapestry. Now, it means that person has been faithful to the advice of St. John of the Cross. He said, it does not matter if a bird is tied with a rope or with a tiny thread. It cannot fly to freedom. Now, when you reach this stage, nothing can disturb you. No matter what will happen, because your faith in God is already like Jesus' faith. This stage of contemplation begins when the Spirit starts acting in the person from inside out. In the first stages of prayer, in order that you pray, you try to recollect and you try to think of God, and then you go deeper. When you reach this state of contemplation, you do not need to do this because the light will come from within outside. When God takes over the person's life, He speaks to the person through the wisdom, the language of God. This communication comes from deep within the person's heart, in the core of one's being. You might be surprised that you meet people who really have the gift of wisdom. You are struck by the way they say, by the way they talk. It does not come from their human mind. It comes from God within, at the core of one's being. It is a wisdom that does not depend on one's intellectual powers, like reasoning, analyzing, or one's feeling and emotion, or one's ideas, standards, and opinion, or on one's psychic power. It is a wisdom that comes directly from God, who dwells within and unites the person to God. The movement now is inside out. Let me give you a very, very good example. There was a person who was suffering so much because he was being despised by other people. She was being tormented by other people. The persons do not anymore believe in her, and then they talk against her and all of that. And one day, she was praying before the crucifix. And she was asking Jesus, Jesus, why is it that people are really, really putting me down? Why is it that now I'm no longer like a person? I'm only like an animal that persons do not. I am really suffering, Jesus. Why is it that you strip me of everything? And then suddenly, he hears deep within her a tiny voice that said, unless you are stripped of everything, you cannot become like me. From then on, the person no longer cares whatever his suffering is, because now he becomes like Jesus. The first stage of prayer, God communicates from the outside. But now, God communicates from within. That is why you will be surprised. You will meet people who do not have any knowledge, who have not gone to school, but then they can talk to you with sense. They can talk to you with the gift of wisdom. Now, God takes over the person's life. And then the language of God and the communication comes from deep within. A wisdom that does not depend on intellectual or rational reasoning, analyzing one's feeling or one's emotion. It comes from God within. It comes directly from God, who dwells within and unites the person to God. Now the movement is from inside out. You will be surprised that I have met so many people among the poor who have already reached this stage. They are continually at peace. They are continually loving God, even in spite of their sufferings. Now, this is my message to parents. This is my message to teachers. This is my message to the leaders. When you make decision, do you really listen from the wisdom that comes within? Do you decide and listen to God in your decision? Do you really decide from deep within? Who are the persons who really would promote God's honor and glory in the world? Who would not destroy morality and all of this? Do you really listen to what God is telling you? Or do you only listen to what people are saying, telling you? Now, is it really God whom you are listening when you decide for people under you? Are you not influenced only by personal reasons? Because whenever you decide not according to the will of God, God will ask you at the moment of your death, why did you decide not according to my will? Are you not projecting your own conflicts? So, the unresolved conflict of a leader becomes the social sin of the group. That's why a mother who have unresolved conflict on sex, 6 of her children are not getting married. Why? Because all the time you're talking about it and you're telling your children, do not do this, do not do that, and do not do that. So it becomes also the conflict of the children. Now, if you have conflict on money, you will always talk about money and money and money, and so your children will become very materialistic. That's why we need contemplative parents. We need contemplative leaders who are really listening to the Spirit, directing and directing other people's lives. However, if you're a contemplative leader or parent, you can guide those people under you to interior freedom. Otherwise, you will enslave them and they are not free. And one cannot speak, since contemplation basically is an experience of love that sets the person free. So it's very important that parents, leaders, formators can present Jesus as the great lover. And one cannot speak, much less present Jesus as a lover, unless they themselves have a personal experience of His love. Now, Karl Rahner, a famous Jesuit, wrote 30 years ago, the fervent Christian of tomorrow have to be a contemplative, otherwise they cannot become Christians. You know, our problems today are very complicated. The problems of the modern world are so complicated. So we need people who can decide according to the will of God. How can we be in a world without being influenced by its worldly values and attitudes? The responsibility of leaders, formators, and parents are tremendous. But if you have experienced God in this stage of contemplation, you have nothing to fear. How do you decide? Look at first the reality of your decisions. Why am I deciding this way? Am I influenced by somebody? Is it really the will of God that I will decide this way? Pray for interior freedom, that you can be objective to listen to the Spirit in order to make decisions. Why? Because at the moment of your death, God will judge you for that. Where did you decide? How did you decide? Now, why? Because as Saint Teresa said, a contemplative, meaning to say the person who reached this stage, is like a feather under the breath of God, very sensitive to what God wants her to do. So, if you reach at this stage, you are continually listening to God. What am I? Saint Teresa also said, holiness is nothing else but listening and doing the will of God every moment. Now, how does the person grow in her life of contemplation in the different stages of prayer? As time goes on, this experience of God that we oftentimes call mystical experience becomes more and more frequent, and this transforms the person into love. Usually, these mystical experiences are fleeting. Let me give you an example. I have a person who come to me for advice. And then she said, Sister, I have already 10 children, and my doctor told me that if I will have another child again, I am going to die because my reproductive organs are already very weak. So what will I do? And then I said, you better go to the bishop and ask the bishop about it, because the bishop will give you special permission. And so she went to the bishop, and the bishop said, all right, you can have ligation. And so she went to the hospital. When she went to the hospital, when she was already in the operating table, she heard the voice inside, you have no faith in me. She stood up, no more ligation, no more ligation. Why? She could not explain. She had 2 more children, and she did not die. You listen inside because God will talk to you. However, if you do not reach this stage, what you will hear is your own selfish desires in your heart. That is why we need to go through great sufferings in order that we will be purified. Usually, these experiences are fleeting. It is only a moment to moment. It's only a moment. For example, there is also another person who told me that she was feeling so afraid to die. And then she said, oh my God, I cannot do this anymore because I'm going to die if I will do this. And then suddenly she hears, I will take you at your best moment. From then on, she was no longer afraid to die. That interior voice will continually talk to you, especially in moments of crisis. Now let us end, and we will continue in the next episode.